We are up to Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, the second line of the Gemara, Amar Rava. If we could just recall what we learned last time, the Pasuk says, Pasuk in Devarim, Parak Yud Beis, Pasuk Yud Zayin, L'sucha lecha b'sharecha ma'aser degancha v'siroshcha yitzarecha. The beginning of the Pasuk is relatively simple. It says you shouldn't eat in your own dwelling places, which we know is referring to outside Yerushalayim. You shouldn't eat meiser, of Dagan, Sirosh, and Yitzar, so different types of Meiser. So the Pasuk is saying there's a negative commandment, there's a lav, and you'll get Malchus if you eat Meiser outside Yerushalayim. Then the Pasuk continues with a whole bunch of things. Now, Reb Shimon looked at this Pasuk. If you remember from last time we had the Brisa, Reb Shimon said, he jumps first to the end of the Pasuk. He says, Trumas Yadecha is Bikurim. Why do I need to tell me Bikurim, if you eat it outside Yerushalayim, you get Malchus? Obviously. It's a kal v'chomer from Meiser, because we know Bikurim is more stringent than Meiser. Must be, it's come to tell me a new chiddush, that if you eat Bikurim before you read the Psukim, you'll get Malchus. So the lo sucha lecho about Bikurim is saying you shouldn't eat it, not outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Of course you shouldn't eat it outside Yerushalayim. But even you shouldn't eat what's unique about Bikurim, which is don't eat it before you read the Psukim. Then Reb Shimon did a funny thing, and Reb Shimon went to Nidvosecha. He's sort of going backwards in the pasuk. Nidvasecha is referring to a toda and shlamim, which means, he said, what's the point in that? If it's telling me not to eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, I know that already. It's come to tell me you shouldn't eat it before the sprinkling of the blood, and if you do, you get malchus. Then Reb Shimon he goes back to the middle of the pasuk. When it says bachar, what's the point in that? If it's come to tell me you shouldn't eat it outside Yerushalayim, it's kal v'chomer meiser. It's come to tell me I shouldn't eat it before the sprinkling of the blood, that's a kal v'chomer from Toda and Shlamim. Must be there's a new Isser by Bechar, which is that you're not allowed to eat it if you're not a Kohen. Good. Then he went to Bikarcha Vitzonecha. Then he went to, what is Bikarcha Vitzonecha referring to? Chatas and Asham. What's the chiddush in that? Right? Once again, if it's outside Yerushalayim, I know that from Meiser. If it's before sprinkling blood, I know that from Toda and Shlamim. If it's a non-Kohen shouldn't eat it, I know that from Bechar. It's come to tell me a new Isser that you shouldn't eat it outside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. Then the word V'chol Nidarecha, we said is referring to Ola. What's that come to teach me? And we said that's come to teach you even a Kohen inside the walls of Yerushalayim, inside the Beis HaMikdash, after the Shrikas Dam, if he eats it, he gets Malchus, because the Olas are supposed to be totally burnt to Shemayim. Good. That was the Brisa which we learned last time. If we could continue now, the second line on Yud Zayin Amud Beis, Amar Rava said, Yelidei Ime Kirib Shimon Telid. Rava said, if a mother is ever going to give birth, she should give birth to a child like Reb Shimon, V'i lo, and if not, lo selid. If not, don't bother giving birth. It's only worth giving birth to a child like Reb Shimon. He was just coming to explain how amazing Reb Shimon is. Even though there are questions on Reb Shimon, but he was basically saying Reb Shimon's a genius in what he did over here. He's saying, I have a bunch of questions on him, but he was a genius. Now, the Gemara says, what was Rava's question on Reb Shimon? So his question was, first of all, my chorma de bikur mi meiser. He said, if you look back at the Bryce that we learned last time, but it was assumed that Bikurim is more machmir than Meiser, and that's how the ball got rolling. So he said, what's the chumrah Bikurim mi Meiser? Shekein asurim lezarim. You want to tell me the reason it's more machmir is because a zar, a non-Kohen, is not allowed to eat a bachar, not allowed to eat Bikurim, but he's allowed to eat Meiser, so it's obviously more stringent. So Rava said, Adrabah, on the contrary, Meiser chamer, Meiser is more machmir, shekein asur la'onin. We know Meiser is prohibited for an onin, somebody who had a relative who died, who wasn't yet buried, is not allowed to eat Meiser, and he's allowed to eat Bikurim. So Meiser is actually more machmer than Bikurim, which sort of uproots everything Reb Shimon said. Because Reb Shimon's whole point was, well, if Bikurim is more machmer, why did the Torah write Bikurim? I know it as a kal v'chomer from Meiser. Well, if Meiser is actually more stringent, then that's not a question. Okay, and then Rava continued, Umay chorma de toda v'shlami Meiser. And he said to Reb Shimon, obviously not to him, but he said about Reb Shimon, what's the chumrah of a carbon toda and shlamim more than Meiser, which Reb Shimon was so sure about? Shekein tu'unin matan damim, because you need the sprinkling of the blood, the imurim, and you burn up the fats like a mizbeach. In other words, Toda and Shlamim, you bring stuff on the Mizbech. The blood goes on the corners on the Mizbech, and you burn the fats on the Mizbech, as opposed to Meiser, it doesn't go on the Mizbech, so it's not as Kaddish, so it's more lenient. So Rava asked, Adarab, on the contrary, Meiser Chamer, Meiser is more Machmer, Shekin Tu'unim Kesef Tzura. We know that Meiser, for you to redeem Meiser, specifically Meiser Sheni, you need to have Kesef Tzura, you need to have a minted coin for it. There's no such thing in regards to Toda and Shlamim. So seemingly, Meiser is more Machmer. Next, Umay Churma de Bechar mitoda v'shlamim. What's the Churma that Bechar had over Toda and Shlamim? And again, you have to go back to the Braisa on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, but you'll see, Reb Shimon assumed that a Bechar is more Machmer than Toda and Shlamim. And that's how he built his whole levels. What's the Chumrah? Shekin Kedushas Mirechem. Why is it more Machmer? Because it's holy from birth. When a Bechar is born, the second he comes out of the womb, he's a Kaddish animal. Adarabba, the opposite's true. Toda v'shlamim chamurim, a Toda and Shlamim is more Machmer. Shekin tu'unim smicha, they need smicha. You're supposed to rest your hands on the carbon. V'nesachim, it needs libations. V'tnufas chazeh v'shok, and you're supposed to wave the chazeh v'shok. These are part of the carbon. Part of the process of bringing the Toda and Shlamim is you're supposed to wave it. Bechar, there's no such thing. You don't do smicha, you don't do nesachim, and you don't do tnufas chazeh v'shok. So Rav is asking, who said Bechar is more machmer? Maybe Toda and Shlamim is more machmer. And then he continued, Umay chumra de chatas va'asham bi Bechar. What's the chiddush? What's the chumra of chatas va'asham over Bechar that Rav was assuming? Shkin kache kachim, because they're kache kachim. Adarab, on the contrary, Bechar chamer, Bechar is more machmer. Shekin kedushas mirechem. The Bechar is more machmer because it's holy from birth. A chatas and asham aren't born as chatas. You made it into a carbon chatas. A Bechar, he was the firstborn. The second he came out, he was kaddish. Umay churma de ola michatas, and what's the churma of an ola over a chatas? V'asham. Shekin kalil, because it's totally burnt. Adarabba, on the contrary, chatas v'asham chamiri, a carbon chatas and asham more machmer. Shekin mechapri, because at least they atone. A carbon ola doesn't specifically atone for any specific thing, more or less. And not only that, the kulu chamir mi ola, all these things are more machmer than ola. The isvu shtei achilas, because they all have two eatings. Two eatings mean all karbanos besides the carbon ola, there's two parts to it. Part of it goes up on the mizbeach to Hashem, and part of it a human eats. Whether it's a Kohen or Yisrael, it's irrelevant, but there's two different achilas. A carbon ola is all one thing, it's just the whole thing goes up to Hashem. So one could argue that ola is less machmer. So basically what Rava said a very funny thing. So Rava said, if a mother is going to give birth to a child, it should be like Reb Shimon. He's amazing. Even though I have all these questions. So, and then he goes along and he rips apart everything Reb Shimon said. To which the Gemara says, Elamai dialide ime Reb Shimon. So the Gemara says, so what did you mean that if you give birth, you should give birth like Reb Shimon? Well, after you ripped apart everything he said, so what's so great about what Reb Shimon did? In other words, the Gemara is asking, Rava conveniently uprooted every single piece of the Braisa that Reb Shimon said. So why is he praising Reb Shimon so much? You would think he wouldn't be praising him now. The Gemara answers, because this that he holds like, this that he holds for himself, he broke up the pasuk and he darshaned it. Rashi explains what that means is, it could be Rava and Reb Shimon are having an argument which thing is more machmer. Reb Shimon says this is more machmer, Rava says this is more machmer. Okay, we could argue about that. Rava saying that doesn't, fine, that's my opinion versus his opinion. But at least in what he said, that he held was things were more machmer, he did a brilliant thing. What he did was, he dashed in the pasuk, he split up the pasuk, as we spoke last time. If you look at the pasuk in front of you, Reb Shimon first dashed in the words from Trumas Yedecha Bikurim, and then, after he did that, he went to the word Nedava, which is, Nedava is referring to the Toda and Shlamim, and then he went back to Bechar. Now, again, we could argue about which one's more machmer, but assuming that Reb Shimon holds these things are more machmer, which, fine, let's assume Reb Shimon did that, if he would have went in order of the pasuk and went just totally backwards, or he would have went totally forward, he never would have been able to pull out any of these halachas. Because, for example, Rashi speaks out, if you look at the Rashi, Til Mai Desvirle, Misaris Lakrav Darsheu, Rashi says, if you skip a couple lines in there, If you go about 6 lines in there, Rashi says, She'im darash tchila u bechar zeh bechar. If Reb Shimon would have started his drashas from the word bechar, in other words, if Reb Shimon would have started off, in other words, when I saw this pasuk, you'd darshan first meiser, and then you'd say bechar. Okay, what's unique about bechar? Now, if you did that, you would say, well, why did the Torah write bechar? Well, to tell me that you shouldn't eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, I know that. Must be bechar has come to tell me a chiddush. Which chiddush? Now, if you read the pasuk straight, then you tell me that bechar has come to tell me that you're not supposed to eat it before the sprinkling of the blood. Because as opposed to what Reb Shimon did was, Shimon first darshan the word nidvosecha to tell me, referring to Toda and Shlamim, and tell me that's the prohibition of eating before the sprinkling of blood, and therefore Bechoros is extra, therefore Bechars come tell me an additional Chiddush. But if you didn't darshan the word Nedava before the word Bechar, then you just get off with a level saying that Bechar is unique, that Bechar you're not supposed to eat it before the sprinkling of the blood. And then you're going to get stuck because then you won't be able to build this pyramid. This pyramid was based on each thing is more machmir than the next. It includes everything under it. It must tell me something additional. That's only if you play around with the words in the pasuk and you darshan first, bikurim first, then you go to nedava, then you go back to bachar, and then you carry on in the rest of the pasuk. But if you would just read the pasuk straight, you wouldn't be able to build this whole pyramid. You would get stuck at the first point, and you'd never know that there's an isser of a bachar eating, a non-Yisrael eating the bachar. So therefore, that's what Rava was coming to say. If we go back in the Gemara now, Rava is saying, fine, we could argue back and forth what's more machmer, that's my opinion versus his, but that's okay. But at least what he holds, Misaris Lekra, he split up the pasuk v'darshle, he darshened it beautifully. He worked it out that we can make this pyramid, which is Toda and Shlam is coming to tell me before Zrikas Dam. Bechar is that plus the next thing, which is that even a Yisrael should not eat it. The next thing was the Chatas and Asham. It's including that, but it's also you shouldn't eat it outside the walls of the Beis Mikdash. And Ola was in addition to that even a Kohen should not eat it. Those are all built on if you have to darshan it that way. Otherwise, you're never going to get to that level. Good. So that's what Rava was praising him. Now, the Gemara has a question on going back to Reb Shimon. Let's go back to the Brisa now. So what did Reb Shimon say? Reb Shimon said, obviously, again, we know the Pashup Shan, the Pasuk is telling me that if you eat Meiser outside the walls of Yerushalayim, you get Malkus. So let's start with the second one. So we said, Nidvosecha is Toda and Shlamim to tell me. Obviously, if you eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, you're going to get Malkus because it's a Kavachomer from Meiser. If Meiser you get Malkus outside Yerushalayim, for sure, Toda and Shlamim you will. So what did Reb Shimon say? So obviously it's come to add on another Isser, that if you eat it outside, that if you eat it before the sprinkling of the blood, you'll get Malkus. Now the Gemara is a very good question. The Gemara says, V'chi mazhirin min adin, do we give out, quote-unquote, warnings through a Kal V'chomer? In other words, we spoke before at the beginning of this parak, for the Torah to make you out, for us to be able to give somebody malchus, there has to be a pasuk in the Torah that says, don't do this. You have to be able to point to a pasuk and say, the Torah specifically gave you a warning and said you're not, warning means the Torah already warned you and said you're not allowed to do this. Now, we've also learned before, you don't give out warnings based on Kal V'chomers. So the Gemara says as follows, in other words, there has to be a specific pasuk for every one of these things telling me that you're not allowed to do it. You can't make a Kal V'chomer out of that. You could read a little more in the Gemara. Even according to the one who says own shiminadin, even if you hold you're allowed to punish based on a Kal V'chomer, which is debatable, and you probably can't, but okay, that's debatable. There might be a machlokas whether you're allowed to give a punishment based on a Kal V'chomer, but according to everybody, ein mazhirim minadin, you can't give out warnings based on a Kal V'chomer. You can't say, well, if the Torah said a negative commandment in regards to this, and I know this is more machmir, so Kal V'chomer, it's like the Torah said that. But the Torah didn't say it specifically. You can't make warnings based on Kal V'chomers. Now, what does that do for us? Now, this is a bomb question on the whole pyramid of Reb Shimon. Because what did Reb Shimon say? Let's start from the second one. Reb Shimon said, why did the Torah have to say Toda and Shlamim? Again, the pasuk says you're not allowed to eat outside Yerushalayim meiser. That's what it says. The Reb Shimon said, well, why does it say Toda and Shlamim in the pasuk? If it's come to tell me that Toda and Shlamim, you're not allowed to eat outside Yerushalayim, if that's the point of the pasuk, I know that as a kal v'chomer from meiser. Whoa, stop right there. You can't make that kal v'chomer because that's a warning based on a kal v'chomer. So you do need it for that. In other words, the Gemara is asking, you need to tell me, lo sucha lecho b'sharecha, to tell me that you're not allowed to eat chatas, you're not allowed to eat a toda and shlamim outside Yerushalayim. Similarly, it's come to tell me a bachar. You're not allowed to eat a bachar outside Yerushalayim, and if you do, you'll get malchus. So the Gemara is asking, this whole pyramid of Reb Shimon cannot allow me to say that because of the kal v'chomer, therefore you're going to get malchus. You can't get malchus based on that. So every one of these things, for example, a toda and a shlamim, or a bechar, or a chatas v'asham, or a carbon ola, all four of those things, how can you get malchus for eating them outside Yerushalayim? It doesn't say the lav on any one of these. In other words, seemingly I need the lav for those things, and it doesn't allow you. So in other words, what are you going to have to say? Obviously the lav was written for each one of these things in regards to eating them outside Yerushalayim, which basically ruined the additional isurim for every single one of these things. So for example, if I eat toda and shlamim before the sprinkling of the blood, what did Reb Shimon say? That's what the pasuk is referring to when it says lo sucha lecho, you're not allowed to eat, and then it says nedava is referring to toda and shlamim. Shimon said that's what's referring to. Tell me you're going to get malchus if you eat it before sprinkling the blood. But the Gemara is saying that's not true. That's only because you made a kal v'chomer, and you can't warn based on kal v'chomers. Really, I need the lo sucha lecho to tell me the point of writing toda and shlamim was that you're not allowed to eat a toda and shlamim outside Yerushalayim, period. This business about not eating it outside Yerushalayim, you can't make that connection because you need it for the first thing. That's the Gemara's question. Let's read that again. V'chi mazhir min adin, are you able to warn min adin? Filu l'man da'amar onshi min adin, even if you hold, you could punish through a kal v'chomer. Ein mazhir min adin, you're not allowed to warn based on a kal v'chomer. To which the Gemara answers, isura ba'alma. It's merely an isser. What does that mean? What the Gemara is answering is, you're right. And really, the lav is coming for each thing to tell me that every one of these four things, toda and shlamim, chatas and asham, toda and shlamim, bechar, chatas asham, and ola, the pasuk is come tell me every one of these things, if you eat them outside Yerushalayim, you get malchus. That's the point. This whole pyramid is coming for a separate thing to tell me that you get an isser. You won't get malchus because we can't make the kal v'chomer based, can't make the warning based on the kal v'chomer. It's come to tell me in regards to, there's an isser, it's usser to do it, but you won't get malchus for it. To which the Gemara asks, Va'amar Rava, but Rava said, Zar sha'achol min ola. Let's think about this for a second. A zar is a non-Kohen. Sha'achol min ola, he ate from a carbon ola. Lifnei zrika, chutz lechoma. Okay, this is really a bad thing. So how many bad things does this guy do? The guy who's not a Kohen, he took a carbon ola, he ate it before the sprinkling of the blood, and he ate it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, which would include eating it outside the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. So let's think. First of all, he's a non-Kohen. So we know from the Bechar case that a non-Kohen who eats it, again, ola is the highest level in this pasuk. It includes everything seemingly. Right? According to Reb Shimon, this was the highest level. So first of all, he ate it before Zrikas Tam. So that we learn out from the Toda and Shlamim, you'll get malchus for that. Second of all, he ate it outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Third of all, he ate it outside the Beis Hamikdash. Fourth of all, he's not a Kohen. Fifth of all, it's a carbon ola, and even if a Kohen eats it. So Rava said, a zar who eats min ola ufnei zrika chutz l'chama, L'Reb Shimon, according to Reb Shimon, loke chamish, he's going to get 5 sets of malchus. End of Rava's statement. But what do you see from here? The Gemara is asking, you see from Rava that you actually get 5 sets of lashes. It's not an isser ba'alma, it's not just merely an isser, it's something you shouldn't be doing. It's telling me, it's actually, you're going to get malchus. Which brings us back to our question, seemingly, because you told me it's just for an isser, but Rava clearly said you get 5 sets of malchus. The Gemara answers, Chamisha Isurin Have. It only means you get 5 Isurim. you'll get each one of these things is a kal v'chomer. You're allowed to make a kal v'chomer to say it's usher to do. That you want to do, that's fine. But you can't make a kal v'chomer to create a negative commandment and therefore say you get malchus. So the Gemara is saying when Rava said loke chamesh, you get 5 malchus, he didn't really mean it. What he meant was it's 5 isurim, it's 5 things which are prohibited, but you don't get malchus. The word loke is very lav dafka, is very not exact. To which the Gemara asks, va'anantnan, but we learned in our Mishnah, quote, elu hein alokin. But we learned in our Mishnah the following people get malchus, which was, and in that list was, if you look at Rashi, Viktani bikurim ve'ochel kache kachim chotzaklayim. Our Mishnah says if one eats kache kachim outside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, outside the curtains, it says you get malchus. So Gemara is asking, don't tell me that what this means is just inert. The Gemara is saying right now, when Rav Shimon said this whole pyramid, he wasn't saying it in regards to malchus, because you can't make a kal v'chomer in regards to making a negative commandment to give people malchus. All he meant was 5 different isurim could come out of it, but you're not going to get malchus. To which we said, okay, so when Rava said you get 5 lashes, he doesn't really mean it, it means you 5 isurim. Okay, but the problem is the Mishnah says these are the people who get lashes. One of them is somebody who eats the kachim meat outside the walls of the Beis Mikdash. That's a problem, because the Mishnah clearly said, you want to say the word loka as lavdafka, fine. But when it says, these are the people who get lashes, and it says somebody who eats it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, that seems to say you get lashes. To which the Gemara answers, Ella kroyis serahu. So the Gemara answers, really this entire thing is an extra pasuk. What does that mean? Michti, the Gemara says, let's explain. Let's analyze this. Ksiv, it says, quote, in a different pasuk, it says, V'avesim sham, you should bring over there, V'chaut el fnei Hashem lokecha b'makom asher yevchar. It says in the pasuk, this pasuk is in Devarim Yud Beis, pasuk Vav and Zayin, which is a little bit before the pasuk we're dealing with. Pasuk Vav and Zayin. It says, V'avesim shama, you should bring over there, into the Beis HaMikdash, Olosechem, Maisresechem, Trumas Yedechem, Nidrosechem. Basically, it gives the entire exact same list of what we have in our pasuk. And it says, V'chalt Hashem fnei Elokechem. You're supposed to eat all this stuff in the Beis HaMikdash. Where you're supposed to bring this stuff is the Beis HaMikdash. Now, the Gemara says, Lichtov Rachmana, the Torah could have written by us, when we get to pasuk Yud Beis, when we get to pasuk Yud Zayin, the pasuk could have said, Lo sucha le'ochlam. It could have said, don't eat all those things outside the gates of Yerushalayim. In other words, I already gave you a comprehensive list in pasuk Vav and Zayin. It says there's an asay, you're supposed to eat these things in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, if you want to tell me a negative commandment about eating them outside Yerushalayim or outside the Beis HaMikdash, it should have said, Lo sucha le'echlam, you should not eat those things. But it didn't say that. Mihader, to return befarish bu Rachman alamli. Why did the Torah have to go back and explain every single little detail? In other words, it could have just said, don't eat all of the above things outside Yerushalayim. Why do I need to repeat every single word? What's coming to do is to, the yechude means to specify an additional specific lav for every single one. In other words, if you look at Rashi, Rashi explains, Hachi Garsina, in the second Rashi over here. In other words, the Gemara is basically saying there's an extra, not only is there an extra word over here, not only is every word extra, the entire pasuk is extra. So look at Rashi. Rashi is the second Rashi over here. Hachi Garsina, Mahade Prusha B'chol Chad, Lam Lishmamne L'chudei Lav L'chol Chad V'chad. Ki'ilu, it's as if, Chazar V'kasav, I'm in Rashi, Chazar V'kasav, it returned and wrote, B'chol Echad, Lav D'chutz L'choma. It's like the Torah wrote every single one of these words. You know, the Torah didn't have to write all these words again. Why did the Torah say you shouldn't eat outside the wall, outside Yerushalayim, and then it gives a list, Toda, Chatas, Ola, Bechar. Now, the fact that it did that, and it could have gone away with just saying don't eat the above things outside Yerushalayim, is coming to tell me, so it's like it wrote a special Isser on every single one of these. Since it's not an inyan for it, because you can know from a Kal V'chomer, Tnu in ledavar acher. Each one is like for a different thing. Hilkach. Bibikurim la'oichol achlo kar leim asa. V'inach kol chad v'chad the mil sasa. Each one is coming for its own specific thing. So, in other words, what the Gemara is saying is that basically, that when the Torah wrote Lo sucha lechol b'sharecha, that's one lav. And that's one thing, and that would include everything above. So it's basically there's a straight lav on every single thing eating chutz l'choma. That's if the Torah would say, don't eat b'sharecha, don't eat outside Yerushalayim, any of the above things. So basically what I have is, I have a negative commandment for every single one of these things. Now the fact that the Torah went out and specified every one, it's basically the Torah saying, besides the Isser of specifically every one of these things, eating them outside Yerushalayim, in addition, each one has its own separate lav. So that's the answer to the question. The question was, seemingly you can't get malchus for this stuff because you're making it a kal v'chomer. You're only building it based on the pyramid of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara's answer is no, because it's like the Torah wrote the lav twice. Because first of all, it wrote it, and it could have just said the above. But it wrote it, and it said every specific one, so basically there's like two lavim on every single one of these things. So one of them is to tell me that you're not allowed to eat it outside Yerushalayim, and the next one will be to tell me every single one for its specific chiddush. For Toda and Shlamim, you're not allowed to eat it before the Zrikas Tam, and so on and so forth. So basically what the Gemara is answering is, it's not learned out of a kal v'chomer. The warnings are not from kal v'chomer. It's like the Torah wrote Lo sucha lechol b'sharecha twice. It's like it wrote it once, because again, it didn't have to specify everything. The fact that it did, it's like it wrote it twice, so you get two negative commandments here. One for every one of these things if you eat them out of Yerushalayim, and one for if you eat Toda and Shlamim before the Zrikas Dam. So that's basically the answer to the question. Therefore, Shimon comes out at the end of the day. So when Rava actually said, what the Gemara is answering is you're actually going to get malchus for all these things. So if we go back to Rava said that a zar who eats an ola before Zrika, chutz l'choma, according to Shimon, you get 5, he means you get 5 lashes. It's ein mazhir min adin. It's not mazhir min adin. It's based on the psukim. It's like the psukim were written twice, and therefore you could get malchus. Good. So that's the end of this. So again, what we started with was Reb Shimon asked on the brisa. Rava asked on the brisa. Rava said first. Rava praised Reb Shimon. And he said, if somebody's going to give birth to a child, they should give birth to a child like Reb Shimon. To which, and then Rava said, but I have questions on every one of his things. Everything is more machmir than the other. Really, you could learn the exact opposite. To which the Gemara explains, so what was Rava's big praise over here on Reb Shimon? His praise was, what he was saying was, that I don't agree with his chumras, but in his world, that these are chumras, it was a genius thing to split up the pasuk the way he did to allow us to make this pyramid. To which the Gemara asked, fine, in Reb Shimon himself, how can you make this pyramid? But the pyramid is based on making a kal v'chomer. You're making a kal v'chomer to make me chayav malchus. You can't do that. To which the Gemara first answered, okay, it doesn't mean you're going to get malchus, it just means it's wrong to do, but you're not going to get malchus. To which the Gemara asked, from Rava says you get 5 sets of lashes. So the Gemara answers, that's also lav davka. To which the Gemara says, but the Mishnah says, Elu heina lokin, you get malchus. To which the Gemara said, you're right, I take back what I said before. And the Gemara says, Ella. Ella means, you're right, you will get malchus. How are you going to get malchus? You can't give a kal v'chomer, you can't make malchus based on a kal v'chomer. The answer is, it's like the Torah wrote lo suchal a second time. I have a double lo suchal over here. Because it could have just it could have just said in the pasuk, you should not eat the above things. That would be one isser. And that would include, as if I wrote, don't eat the following things. So that's one isser there. The fact that it wrote lo suchal, and then it specified every single one, it's another lav in the Torah to tell me, there's a lav on everything above, don't eat it outside Yerushalayim. In additional, there's a lav on eating it chutz before the Zrikas Tamim, or eating a bachar if you're a zar, or every single one of these things. So at the end of the day, according to Reb Shimon, you will get malchus for every one of these things. This is Rashi's pshat in the Gemara. Obviously, if you look over here, Tosfos has very big Tosfos over here. Tosfos and the Rishonim have an entirely different pshat in the Gemara. But this is the way Rashi learns the Gemara.